The valley was already awake before Israel moved. Below the hills, Midian spread across the land with Amalek and the people of the east. Their tents covered the ground. Their animals shifted in the dark. Their fires burned low beneath the night air. The camp did not look like something a weakened nation could challenge. It looked like a flood that had learned to breathe. Smoke hung over the valley in low ribbons. Camels groaned in the darkness. Men moved between tents with the dull confidence of an army that had grown used to taking what it wanted. The sound below was not one sound but many: leather, hooves, muffled speech, metal, restless animals, the occasional flare of laughter from men who did not believe Israel could threaten them. Gideon could see it from above. He had seen fear before. He had felt it in his hands, in his stomach, in the narrow space between obedience and retreat. But the Lord had brought him this far, and now the trumpet had sounded. Men had gathered. Now the enemy was in the valley. 32,000 men stood with Gideon at the spring of Harod. Against Midian, even that number must have felt thin. Israel had been broken down for years. The nation had learned how to survive under oppression, but survival is not the same as freedom. Some of the men held weapons they had not used in years. Some looked toward the valley and tried not to show what passed through their faces. Others shifted their weight in the dark, swallowing hard, listening to the enemy below and the breathing of brothers beside them. Still, 32,000 men looked like something. The Lord said it was too much. Too many men. The word must have settled strangely over the camp. Gideon could look across the valley and see the multitude. He could hear the movement of Midian below him. He could measure his own people and know they were not enough by any ordinary count. But the Lord was not measuring the battle the way men measure battles. God saw the danger beneath the danger. Midian threatened Israel's bodies, fields, and homes. Pride threatened their worship. If Israel won by a force that looked explainable, the people would rise from the victory and say their own hand had saved them. The Lord would not rescue them in a way that fed the sickness that had helped destroy them. Deliverance had to expose the deliverer. So Gideon stood before the men and gave the word no commander wants to give before a battle. Whoever was fearful and trembling could return home. For a moment, the camp must have held its breath. No one had to explain the invitation. Fear had already been present among them. It had walked with them from their homes and stood beside them at the spring. Now it was being named aloud before everyone. Then men began to move. One man gathered his things, another followed, then another. The sound grew until it was no longer the quiet shifting of a few uncertain soldiers, but the heavy departure of thousands. Dust rose beneath their feet, faces turned away from the valley, weapons lowered. Men who had answered the trumpet now walked back toward their homes. 22,000 left, 10,000 remained. The smaller camp stood under the same sky, facing the same enemy, but everything felt different. Space opened where men had stood. The hills seemed larger, the valley seemed deeper. The fires of Midian still burned below them. If Gideon wondered whether the Lord was finished reducing Israel, he did not have to wonder long. The Lord spoke again. There were still too many. So Gideon brought the men down to the water. The spring moved in the quiet, dark and cold, reflecting small pieces of sky. Men knelt, hands dipped, some bent low with their faces near the water. Others brought water to their mouths with their hands, alert and ready. It was a simple act, ordinary enough to pass unnoticed on any other day. Water ran over fingers and wrists, knees pressed into damp earth. The night carried the small sounds of drinking men, cupped hands, swallowed water, the scrape of sandals, the quiet relief of thirst answered before battle. None of them could have known that the Lord was using that ordinary moment to narrow Israel's army to a number no strategist would choose. But the Lord was separating an army. When the test was finished, only 300 men remained. 300 against a camp that could not be counted. 300 men with empty spaces around them where thousands had stood. 300 men beside a leader who had never asked to become the symbol of Israel's courage. 300 men chosen not because they made victory look likely, but because they made boasting impossible. The Lord told Gideon that by these 300 men he would save Israel. That word had to become stronger than what Gideon saw. The rest of the men were sent away to their tents, but Gideon kept the provisions and trumpets. The army was now too small for human confidence and exactly small enough for divine clarity. Israel had been brought down to a number that could not carry the glory. The 300 would have felt the absence of the others. Empty ground has a sound of its own before battle. The camp was quieter now, leaner, more exposed. Every man who remained could look around and feel how little stood between Israel and the multitude below. Night came over the valley, the kind of night that makes every sound sharper, the kind of darkness where fear grows teeth. Midian lay below, spread out in the valley like locusts in abundance. Their camels were as countless as sand on the seashore. A man could stare into that darkness and feel his courage drain away before the battle ever began. The Lord knew Gideon. He knew the obedience in him. He knew the fear in him. He did not confuse one for the absence of the other. The Lord had called Gideon forward, but he also gave mercy to the weakness still trembling inside him. That night the Lord told him to go down against the camp. But if he was afraid to go down, he could go with his servant Purah and listen to what the enemy was saying. After that, his hands would be strengthened. It was a tender command inside a terrifying assignment. So Gideon went down with Purah. They moved through the darkness toward the outer edge of the enemy camp. The ground beneath them was uneven. The smell of animals hung in the air. Tents rose like dark shapes against darker earth. Somewhere a man coughed. Somewhere leather creaked. Somewhere a fire pressed its last red light into the night. Every step had to be placed carefully. Loose stones could betray them. Dry brush could crack beneath a sandal. The nearer they came, the larger Midian felt. The camp was no longer a distant mass in the valley. It was bodies sleeping, guards breathing, animals shifting, weapons close enough to catch torchlight. Gideon was close enough now to be discovered, close enough to hear voices. A Midianite was telling his companion a dream. In the dream, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian. It struck a tent, turned it upside down, and the tent fell flat. Barley was the bread of the poor. It was not an image of royal strength or polished power. It was common, humble, easily overlooked. Yet in the dream, it rolled into the camp and overturned what looked established. It was the kind of dream a soldier could have laughed away in daylight. But in the deep night, with fear already moving beneath the surface, the image carried weight. A poor man's bread had struck the tent. Something small had overturned something proud. The other man understood with fear. This was the sword of Gideon, son of Joash. God had given Midian and all the camp into his hand. Gideon heard the enemy confess what God had already promised. The Lord had gone before him into the dark. Before Gideon raised a sword, fear had entered Midian. Before Israel shouted, the enemy was already interpreting its own collapse. Before the battle opened, God had placed testimony in the mouth of the camp Gideon feared. Gideon worshipped. There, near the edge of danger, with Midian sleeping around him and Purah beside him, Gideon bowed before the Lord. The valley had not changed. The numbers had not changed. The 300 were still 300, but the word of the Lord had become heavier than the multitude below. He returned to the camp of Israel with strength in his voice. Arise, for the Lord has given the host of Midian into your hand. Then Gideon divided the 300 men into 3 companies. He put trumpets into their hands. He gave them empty jars. Inside the jars he placed torches. Clay was passed from hand to hand. Torches were hidden where their fire could not yet be seen. The men could feel the heat inside the vessels, contained and waiting. Trumpets rested against their palms instead of swords. The plan itself required obedience before it offered understanding. It was a strange preparation for war. No siege engines, no visible blaze of weapons, no massed army waiting for a charge, just 300 men in the dark, holding sound in one hand and hidden fire in the other. Gideon told them to watch him. When he came to the edge of the camp, they were to do what he did. When he and those with him blew the trumpets, they were to blow theirs on every side of the camp and cry out for the Lord and for Gideon. The men moved into place. The valley lay under the middle watch of the night. The guards had just been changed. Sleep and alertness mingled uneasily in the enemy camp, that thin hour when the body is present but the mind is slow. Around Midian, the 3 companies took their positions. The hills held them in silence. No one spoke now unless he had to. Men gripped jars carefully. Breath came shallow. A torch hidden in clay is still fire, and every man knew that the light in his hands would soon announce him to an army too large to count. Every man stood in his place, not rushing, not proving himself, waiting for the appointed moment. Then Gideon blew the trumpet. Across the darkness the others answered. Trumpets split the night from every side. Clay jars shattered against the ground. Torches burst into view. Sudden fire where there had been darkness. 300 flames appeared around the camp like judgment waking at the edges of sleep. The sound of breaking clay struck the valley with violence. Fire leapt up in a ring around Midian. What had been hidden in the hands of weak men now burned openly in the dark. The men cried out, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon!" Midian woke into terror. Men stumbled from tents. Animals lurched against ropes. Shadows moved violently in torchlight. The sound of trumpets came from everywhere. The shout of Israel rose from the darkness. Fire surrounded the camp and confusion spread faster than command. A sleeping army tried to understand too many things at once. Noise from every side. Light where there should have been night. The cry of Israel, the panic of animals, the flash of blades in half-wakened hands. Fear filled the spaces where command should have been. But Gideon's men did not rush down, as heroes trying to seize glory. They stood, every man in his place, and the Lord set the sword of each Midianite against his companion. The camp turned on itself. Panic became a weapon. Darkness magnified fear. Men who had come to devour Israel now struck one another beneath the sound of Israel's trumpets. The multitude that looked unstoppable began to break from within. What Israel could not do by strength, the Lord did by his power. The enemy fled toward Beth-shittah and Zererah, toward the border of Abel-Meholah by Tabath. The night that had begun with Israel reduced to weakness became the night Midian scattered in terror. Messengers went through the hill country of Ephraim, calling men to come down against Midian and seize the waters. The victory widened beyond the first shout, and the princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb, were taken. Yet the heart of the night remained clear. The torches were not proof of Israel's greatness. The trumpets were not proof of Israel's strategy. The broken jars were not proof that weakness itself is powerful. They were witnesses. They testified that the Lord had been working before Israel could see it. He had reduced the army, entered the enemy's dreams, strengthened Gideon's hands, and appointed the hour when hidden fire would break into view. The Lord had saved his people in a way that left no room for the human heart to crown itself. He had reduced the army, strengthened the fearful servant, troubled the enemy, and turned the swords of Midian against Midian. The victory belonged to him before the first trumpet sounded. Gideon was a judge, raised up by mercy, used by the Lord in a dark generation, carried by a strength that was not his own. The 300 would remember the sound of that night for the rest of their lives. Clay breaking, trumpets crying, fire rising, and the enemy collapsing under a fear the Lord himself had sent. The night belonged to God. And in the valley where fire broke through darkness and fear broke inside the enemy camp, Israel saw again what they were always meant to remember. The Lord saves, and he will not share his glory with the idols of men.